Every 4 years, no matter what happens in the world, if there's COVID-19, if there's hell or high water, if aliens come in and invade this planet, the halving is going to go on.
Hello and welcome back to Altcoin Bus Spotlight with me, Leah Heilpan, the show where we speak to entrepreneurs, innovators and thought leaders in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. Joining me on the show today is Matty GREENSPAN, the founder of Quantum Economics, the company that looks to educate and inform the space on what is going on in the markets. Matty is also a trader and a market analyst, and previously he was a senior market analyst at eToro. Let us know in the comment section below who you want us to interview next, and if you like the show, then don't forget to hit the like button. Matty, it's great to have you today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm having fun.
Absolutely. There's a lot of fun to be had today, particularly because we've seen BTC hit highs of 8.8K. So I want to go back a little bit and I want to talk about the coronavirus because I want to understand, how do you think it's affecting the price of cryptos on the whole, and then in particular Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin is it's a very small part of the global economy. And I think that, it's affected everything so much. Bitcoin just kind of went along, got swept up with it, just like many other sectors have. Generally, what we've seen is that Bitcoin was following the stock market very closely because Bitcoin and other cryptos are considered a high-risk investment, just as the stock markets are high risk. So all of the high-risk all categories all kind of went together. They went down at the same time, and everybody was selling off everything of value around the middle of March. But now we can see that things have pretty much turned around. If we look at it from the beginning of the year, Bitcoin is up about 10% today from the beginning of the year. So it's doing pretty well, I think. All things considered.
Yeah, all things considered. But it's interesting because people refer to Bitcoin as this safe haven asset. And I think initially when, all the stocks crashed, Bitcoin, I think it went down to around 3-4K. People said, well, it's not a safe haven asset at all. But do you think it's actually proving to be such a thing now that I guess everything else is down, but Bitcoin just seems to be pumping?
So the fact that it's pumping actually proves that it's not a safe haven asset more than anything. Because a safe haven asset is supposed to kind of hold its value when other things are going down. Right now, today, the stock market's up about 3%, and Bitcoin's up about almost 13% at the moment. So 3% is a fantastic day on Wall Street on regular circumstances. But of course, under COVID-19, it's just fantastic performance. So what we're seeing is continue. So it's basically the most correlated that it's ever been with the stock market ever. So basically, whenever investors, on the days that investors feel like putting money into the market, putting their money to work for them, both Bitcoin and the stock markets are going to go up together. And then on days that people are a bit more fearful, they don't know, maybe whatever fears there are, things are coming down, they're going to come down.
But do you think it has anything to do with the upcoming halving? And how do you think the halving is actually going to affect the price then?
Yeah, so the halving is really more, as far as I see it anyways, I'm not so concerned about what the price is going to be at the halving. I believe that a halving event usually takes about 2 to 3 months to really price it in. What we're likely to expect is the hash rate, which has grown astronomically over the last few years, is very likely to come down as some of the miners who are not profitable turn off their rigs. But generally speaking, what the halving event really is a reaffirmation, a reminder that Bitcoin is something that has a limited supply. It's the idea of digital scarcity embodied. It's basically saying, okay, everybody, every 4 years, no matter what happens in the world, if there's COVID-19, if there's hell or high water, if aliens come in and invade this planet, the halving is going to go on.
Yeah.
And we're going to see Bitcoin's supply and the incoming supply reduced by half. We're basically going from 3.6% inflation per year down to 1.8% inflation per year. And that's what it's all about.
But you mentioned miners there, and I kind of want to focus on that. What do you think is going to happen to those who aren't, going to be able to find mining Bitcoin profitable anymore? Do you think there's going to be any concern there?
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, and I think that the fact that we are seeing a pump right now is going to be very helpful for the miners. At the moment, there are thousands, probably tens of thousands of mining rigs called S9, which are Antminer S9s. Those are kind of old at this point, but they're still a little bit profitable. It still pays for most miners to keep them on. That's when the block reward is at 12 and a half. Once the block reward is halved and it goes down to 6.25, many of those miners, depending on their electricity costs, are going to be unprofitable. So they're going to unplug those S9s. The last estimate that I heard was that S9s contribute about half of the overall hash rate of Bitcoin. And I don't think that they're all going to be unplugged, but we could see a great many of them. And it's going to depend on the price. And I'm going to assume also because of COVID-19 and the crash in the price of oil, a lot of electricity costs have come down as well. So we'll see how it plays out. But overall, even if the hash rate comes down by 60% or 70%, we should know that the network is still secure. There's still a distributed model, and it's still one of the most secure, probably the most secure computer network on the planet.
And you mentioned oil there, so I have to pick you up on this because it's interesting, right? It's sort of one of those commodities where people just say, well, it just has intrinsic value. It will always be sort of that safe haven asset, but not quite so much. So when people look at Bitcoin and they ask, what is its intrinsic value, particularly in comparison to the likes of gold and oil, what would you say it is?
Right. So I think that what happened in oil the other day really challenged all of our perceptions on what value is.
Yeah.
And we have to really understand. I mean, first of all, I'm kind of blown away by the fact that the oil producers didn't drastically reduce what they were doing as soon as they saw that the demand dropped off. I mean, the demand went to nil pretty much overnight, and the producers just kept pumping. I mean, they should have been sheltering in place like the rest of us, to be perfectly honest.
There you go.
But they didn't, and now capacity is full. That's not something that can really happen to Bitcoin. I mean, you can always just store. You'll never run into a storage issue on Bitcoin. And if the hash rate comes down, that's fine because more people will come in. It'll encourage new players to get into the market. So as far as that's concerned, I think that it's a lot more sound than most commodities, I would say. But of course, it is, like I said in the very beginning, it's an emerging asset, so it is high risk.
So naturally, just anything which is new and immature, there's going to be that risk there.
Exactly. Where does Bitcoin come in as a safe haven, right? And there are very specific places in the world: Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Iran, Argentina. People who cannot rely on their own currency, and they know for a fact. For almost a fact that they're going to come into the same store in a month from now, and the prices are going to double. In those type of situations, if you want to have something or money, or you want to store your value outside of that system, somewhere away from the government, and somewhere that's not going to erode overnight just because the government is printing too much money, that's where it comes in as a safe haven. And we do hope that the United States hasn't gone too far, or Europe, or Japan for that matter, haven't gone too far with the stimulus while we've all been sheltering in place. They've been pumping money into the system. Obviously, that would be very devastating. But if somebody was afraid of that, I know of a perfect hedge.
And I kind of also just want to stick with the halving for a sec, because you mentioned that it's not something that you might see have its effect straight away. We might start to see new highs in the coming months. So when do you think we'll actually start to see new all-time highs? And would you say we're approaching a bull market by any chance?
Well, as you know me, Leigh, I'm never one to really try and predict the future.
I know.
Uh, I believe that any well-diversified portfolio should have gold and Bitcoin in it at this point. Um, we're getting to a point where they're pumping money into the system at a very rapid rate. We don't know what the effect is going to be of all that money that they've thrown into the system. But I would say that the most likely scenario at this point is that as soon as people start getting back to work and they start spending again, or spending that money that they've been given, we are going to see some period of persistent inflation. We don't know how much inflation, if it's going to be too much. You never really know until you've gone too far.
You've also spoken about Bitcoin's annual inflation actually dropping then, and therefore adoption isn't necessarily possible, or sorry, adoption isn't necessary then to actually hold Bitcoin's price. So can you talk us through this and explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, you're talking about the tweet that I sent
Yes, I am.
last week. Okay.
Yeah.
So so I'm gonna give the background on the tweet, and then I'm gonna come in and give you my epiphany after the tweet. Okay.
Do it.
So my logic on that tweet was that the inflation rate is going from 3.6% down to 1.8%, right? Global inflation as of 2019 was 3.5%, right? So we're now basically half of global inflation. If we're looking at just the United States, right? The United States tries to target just under 2%, right? That's what they want as inflation. And we're going there right now. Bitcoin is going there 1.8% on the needle, right? But one person answered me on that tweet, which got me really thinking. I mean, obviously there was so many people took the tweet, posted it into a blog, and ran with it. Hooray! But I almost wanted to delete it after I saw his response, because we're talking about two different types of inflation, right? What in Bitcoin, it's a very simple metric of how many new Bitcoins will come into the world. This is actually not inflation, but more the rate of creation of money, right? So if we were trying to compare that to a realistic comparison, like the US dollar, for example, we would have to look at something like the money supply, right? Or M2 or M3. Generally speaking, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is doubling every 10 years or something like that, which is a lot more than the 3.5% that I had in mind. Inflation, actually, what I was mentioning is the 3.5%, that's measured as the difference in the price of goods. So actually what's been happening is that they've been throwing a lot of money into the system, but actually it's only inflated the price of goods by a very little amount. So there are two different metrics completely. It's kind of an apples to oranges comparison. Actually, if we were to make the apples to apples comparison, it actually looks a lot more ugly for fiat.
I was also going through a lot of your tweets, as you can tell from my previous question. You also asked your audience, what do you think the next asset will be to actually go to zero? So I thought I'd put the question back at you.
No, you answer.
No, I'm not answering. I'm the journalist. I stay unbiased and unopinionated. What is your answer?
Somebody told me potatoes were already at negative.
What?
It was. I think that was the best answer that I'd seen.
That's a boring answer. I'm looking for a better answer than that.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry.
All
I'm
right.
not here to
We'll
please.
we'll go with potatoes then. But I also want to look at quantum economics, because that's your newest project, your newest company. So please tell us about this. What are you doing, and what's the goal of the company?
Sure. So it's a new project. Basically, there's three main aspects that we're working on, which is analysis, advisory, and money management. As far as the analysis, I mentioned obviously on Twitter, but I'm also writing a daily newsletter, which goes out to hundreds of people around the world, including very respectable journalists who are reading it every single day. I've also put a team together, which is I have 3 analysts and a VP of content. So 4 of the strongest. We actually got 50 applications, and we went through them one by one. We handpicked the very best. And we actually just finished our first project, which is an ebook about ETFs. And if you're thinking potatoes are boring, who's going to read an ebook about ETFs? And actually, my team put this together, and I cried because it was so interesting. I actually was able to read through the whole thing without yawning. And I was just very, very proud of them. And so we're catering to brokers, exchanges, or anybody who wants to put together that type of content, research papers, white papers, etc.
I think that's great, especially to make it more lifelike, to make it more readable. I think that's so important. I think it's what the space needs right now. But on your website, it's interesting. It said that in this climate, if you're not investing, you're losing money.
Yes.
So you have to tell me about this. I think it's interesting.
Yeah. So this actually wrote before COVID-19. At the moment, COVID-19 has taken over everything. I mean, it's like it's very difficult to make any long-term decisions. So what we look at is protection of assets in the short term and taking advantage of the volatility. And obviously, that's not something that I would expect somebody who's just coming in and meandering and visiting. After you've taken the course, which was the next thing that I was going to mention, then we actually have a full course, which is for day traders. You're going to learn all about reading the charts, so technical analysis and understanding the news, fundamental analysis, which is quite reasonably priced, and you'll find it on the website as well. In the environment that we're going into, right, where we've come from, for sure, but where we're going to even more so, people need to up their financial literacy. They need to understand what a central bank is, and they need to understand what their actions are and what the impact is, so they can position themselves into a better place. And that's really what we're trying to do at Quantum Economics.
So it all comes down to financial literacy, and I definitely think it is so important. It's not something that's even taught in schools or anything. Matty, thank you so much. I wish you the best of luck with these future plans. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's great talking to you, Leah. We'll speak again.